In the first 4 years of a libertarian administration, I don't think we're going to achieve that unless we're picking up the pieces, you know, and I don't want that to happen. I'd like to avoid the chaos, and that's my goal. But if there's an economic calamity and they look to the libertarians for solutions, then I think it's conceivable. But that would be more like being a prophet than somebody running for president, you know, and I just don't know how this will happen. But I do believe, though, if we continue to do what we're doing, continue to spend, run up the deficit, print the money, I think we are going to have the crisis. But right now, I'm terrified to think that the people in Washington aren't going to look to us for the answers. They're going to enforce these emergency powers, and FEMA will be in control, not the American people.
Can you, did your committee look into the matter of the debt which foreign countries owe to the so-called U.S. banks?
Yes, that's been ongoing, and certainly 1982 was a key year because there was a big bailout of Mexico and Argentina and Brazil in order to patch it together. And they did everything illegal, just like it was illegally done, even admitted by Don Regan, who was Secretary of Treasury at the time. It was illegal on how they bailed out Continental of Illinois. And they do whatever is necessary to keep the structure together, the system together. If big banks gobble up little banks, but nothing disintegrates. It's not like what was happening in the 1920s, 1930s. And they'll do whatever is necessary. So that's what happened back in 1982. They work internationally, too. The Federal Reserve, the Treasury, the World Bank, Bank of International Settlements, which is the depositor for all the central banks. See, you have the Federal Reserve banks depositing in the Federal Reserve System, but the central banks of the United States and all the other countries use the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland to be the International Bankers Bank. And they all got involved to keep the structure together, and they did. They restored order. That was back when gold went quickly from $300 up to $500 within a 6-month period. But then they saw the market decide, oh, it looks like they're going to hold it together for a while longer, and they certainly have, at the expense of the American taxpayer and at the expense of the dollar. And of course, since then, the dollar's value has gone down 40–50% in value of other currencies. The prices continue to rise. But eventually, my argument is that the marketplace will overwhelm even those men of great power, and there will be a panic that the bankers won't be able to maintain, and then they will want to maintain their power, but not by fine-tuning the economy, but then by the intimidation of political force.
I noticed a very little talked about thing that, this is from the alternative press, where the head of the Fed, Paul Volcker, got a little bill or a little sentence on a rider on a bill passed through Congress that if necessary, the foreign debt that these third world countries to the U.S. banks would be monetarized, which is just a way of saying that the U.S. taxpayers would pay for it.
Yes, this was part of that Monetary Control Act, and that means that if the Fed can hold any asset, they can hold a foreign bond. They literally, under the law today, can buy a Mexican bond that's worthless, put it in the Federal Reserve, and then what monetized means is that it can be collateral for issuing credit, issuing Federal Reserve notes, and that will be considered an asset probably at face value. They're not going to the bond isn't going to be worth anything, obviously, but they can monetize that. That is, mean they will take it as an asset, create new money, and distribute the new money.
So that isn't a direct bailout by the taxpayers.
It's an indirect, because what we do is we buy the Mexican bond and then put the bond in the Federal Reserve. But actually, it works twice, because let's say the Mexican bond, there's $1 billion worth of Mexican bonds down there. So the Fed says, well, we'll buy them. You need some hard cash. We'll buy your bond from you, and we give them the money, and they take that out of the system, and they send it to them. But then when they take it's an asset, it becomes an asset to the Federal Reserve, and they say, we have something we can back up our currency with. So they take this worthless instrument that they paid for with fiat money, and then they put it in their assets, and then they use that to create more money. So they really monetize it twice, so to speak.
How closely tied is the Federal Reserve system and the U.S. banking system with the European banking system, the Rothschild, etc.?
The international bankers are buddies, and they're closer together, and they deal with policy outside most of the legislative institutions. The central bankers are more powerful than, say, the Congresses of the different countries. They have much more power, and therefore through the Bank of International Settlement and the IMF and the World Bank. They have total control of this, and they have meetings where even the Secretary of the Treasury doesn't attend. It's strictly the bankers, the Federal Reserve and the Bundestag and all the other banks of the world. They get together and they make these plans, and that's why they come up with the bailout systems, you know, if there's a banking crisis someplace. But they will do whatever they think is necessary by the creation of new credit. Right now, they have made the agreement that they will create more of these special drawing rights, which is nothing more than credit instruments in the IMF. They create them out of thin air. They have a monetary value based in all currencies, and they can give those to whomever needs them. And they've just agreed to create $40 billion worth of new special drawing rights out of thin air.
Now, what then is the role of the IMF? It seems to me that the taxpayers' money goes to the IMF, they give it to the third world country, which in turn turns it back over to the banks. It looks like a
lot of it just goes directly from, you know, the taxpayers directed to the bank. It never goes to the third world. It's all by computer. But that was, you know, a few years back. I guess it was '83. There was an IMF bailout. They were in financial trouble, and it was $9 billion. Most of that money was necessary to pay interest, you know, just to the big banks. That's why the Panama Canal Treaty existed. But it was a banking deal, too. It was Panama was having trouble making their payments to the banks, and they needed a better cash flow. The Canal Treaty occurred. They had more income. Now their little old Noriega isn't quite so obedient, and they're a little bit annoyed by it all. But, you know, Trujillo's and then Noriega were really the hand-picked people from our business banking industry. They had a banking haven down there. But now Noriega isn't quite so obedient. It's making the bankers a little nervous. They'd like to get rid of him, and so far they haven't been able to. And I think one of the reasons is he has a lot of information that he is threatened with. And they said, if you ever get too close to us, we're going to let the world know exactly how you've been dealing with us and subsidizing our drug trade. So I think he's doing a little blackmailing.
People who've studied the drug trade say that if were it not for the collusion and facilitation and laundering of money by the big banks, the drug trade wouldn't be able to operate.
They'd have a great deal of difficulty because they literally end up buying some of these banks, and they own the banks, and they do, you know, filter their money through. Now, there's a great pretense that there's going to be a lot of crackdown on all these drug dealers and this money coming in and out, and they're going to find out who it is. But I think that's basically designed to use as an excuse, develop this hysteria against drugs so that they have currency controls on whom? On American citizens who finally wise up and say, hey, I can't preserve my wealth in this country. I'm going to put a couple Krugerrands over in the Swiss banks. So they try to take everybody, when near the time of runaway inflation, people want to take the money out of the country to preserve their wealth. And that's why they're writing all these laws, not to catch the drug dealers. I think that's just a front. I think the real reason is to have currency controls on the American citizens, because once a large number of citizens decide to leave, just think of how many people in Mexico tried to come here when their banking crisis occurred. You know, the government clamped down. You can't take the money out. They still did. But we had those, we had credit controls in the 1970s, currency controls, trying to keep people. Britain had them on, off and on, and they always resort to those kind of things. So we can anticipate it, but I think that's one of the purposes of the big drug issue, is order to write these laws so that they control innocent American people who would like to preserve their wealth.
But they could do away with the dope trade pretty fast if they really clamp down on the big banks, but they're the head people in the power structure.
That's right, but they're not likely to do that.
John, you've taken a look at foreign investment in the United States. Some of those statistics, haven't you?
It's startling when you look at it all in one lump sum. Ron, you're from Houston, and there was a story recently about Houston, prime real estate there being about 36% foreign-owned. That occurred in USA Today, a front-page story. Prime real estate in Los Angeles, 49%, 46%, something like that, foreign-owned. We're seeing investments every day, banks being bought, commercial properties, farmland, and the